Welcome to ICT on PNC. This is our bi-weekly podcast that we've been putting out during the legislative session to update our members and listeners on what's been going on in the legislative session here in Texas. We are about 75% of the way through. We got 25% left, 35 days left in the session. It's really gone quickly. Today we have Albert Betts, Executive Director of Insurance Council of Texas, and Angie Cervantes, Government and Legislative Affairs Manager for the Insurance Council of Texas. We're going to go through a couple of the issues that are touching on PNC, everything from TWIA, appraisals, OEM, the ESG kind of bills that are making their way through the Senate, and maybe touch on some workers' comp at the end, workers' compensation if we have some time. But we got about 35 minutes, so we want to run you through on kind of an update of where we're at on in this 88th legislative session. So Albert, Angie, go ahead and take it away and kick things off.
Well, thank you, Rich. Hard to believe we are only 35 days left. It seems like just yesterday we're starting 140 days and counting down how long it would take us to get through the session. So Angie, I know for me, and this has been quick. For people having to testify and be over at the Capitol every day, probably not so quick.
Yes, it's probably been the longest 100 something days for them, but and these 30 whatever days we have left will feel like more because so much gets compressed into such a short period of time.
Yeah, this is what I call it before we got on go time, because it's a rush, a mad dash to the finish. This is when those who are trying to kill bills, this is where you can use the calendar and procedural rules and points of order to kill a bill. If you're trying to pass a bill, this is when you have to keep an eyes in the back of your head, on the side of your head, everywhere to watch out for people who are trying to kill your bill. So very busy. We'll talk about some of those deadlines, talk about the mad dash to the finish, talk about where our major bills are, major PNC bills are. I think we started out, excuse me, I shouldn't say started out, but at some point we're tracking over 500 bills this session. And the next few weeks, as we'll discuss, those will kind of get whittled down to, I'm not going to put a number, but we would guess far less than 500 will actually end up being passed. We started out all optimistic. We had our predictions pre-session. So let's talk a bit about where the reality of the session is, where our bills are that we're tracking for our members, and some of the more interesting developments over the last couple of weeks. So let's start with what has been our favorite subject all session, ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues, and the push to have Texas, I think I would describe it, and correct me if I'm wrong, to make Texas the leader in the pushback on ESG and diversity, equity, and inclusion issues as it relates to insurance.
I think that's what it's been described, and and I think at the beginning we had a series of bills that were out there specifically related to insurance, and there are still 3 that are alive and moving, and so I think that the big one would be House Bill 1239 by Oliverson, which is directly related to ESG scores in relation to rating, and that one is actually going to be brought before the whole House this week. So it'll be interesting to see what happens if there's anything that gets amended onto it, and then what happens on the Senate side. Then we also have,
In that bill, correct me if I'm wrong, that was actually set for, this is legislative talk, but it's set for the local and consent calendar, if I recall correctly. Was it moved to the general?
Yeah, it has been moved to the general calendar for Wednesday.
Okay.
So
no,
that usually happens. So any bill, local and consents, typically for bills that don't have any either any opposition or any controversy whatsoever, and they could get kicked off that calendar, and then the author of the bill would then put them on the regular calendar so that they could get debated. And I think that this bill didn't come out of committee unanimously. So
That's good to know. Yeah, that I think we heard had heard last week it was a local consent bill, which at least was made us wonder what would happen with it. But I'm glad we clarified it's now general calendar bill. One other thing in that bill that gets forgotten as well is there's some language in there that prohibit TDI from considering disparate impact considerations and looking at rating or other insurer practices. So that bears watching as well. See if there's any questions about that. And generally, that's designed, as I recall, to avoid some of the issues they've had in Colorado, where there's been studies or review, or companies have to basically prove up some of their underlying considerations and rates. That does not end up with a disparate impact, which is typically not applied to insurance analysis. So interesting to see where that bill ends up, but that has been an interesting discussion. And again, not going to say odds on passage or not passage, but right now it's moving forward.
And it has a companion, so that's the other thing to watch this time of session too. Is does the bill have somebody on the other side that if a companion is filed, you have more likelihood that somebody's going to pick up that bill and then run with it. And that is Bill King has it in the Senate, so we'll assume that once it goes over there, he'll pick it up and run with it.
Okay. I think the other big anti-ESG bill was Senate Bill 1060 by Senator Hughes, and that one prohibited political shareholder agreements and proxy statements related to, it didn't say ESG, but related to political activity that involves oil and gas and other industries. So that has passed the Senate and is in the House. So we'll see what happens with that. And correct me if I'm wrong, Angie, that one did not have a House companion.
It did not. So we'll see if, we're assuming it'll go to insurance as well, because it does seem to have a direct relation to insurance committee, and the House is a little more specific on rules. So it hasn't been referred yet. So we'll see, I guess, where it gets referred and who picks it up.
Okay, all right, great. So moving on ESG, likely something will pass, but again, we'll see what ends up happening with that. Let's talk auto insurance, because a lot of discussion. We thought the discussion might be around auto rates. There has been none, but there's some bills out there that potentially could have some impact on auto rates, and that these bills are aimed at mandating or requiring that insurers provide for OEM repair processes, which is a term I don't know if we're going to have time to get there and try to explain what we think that means, as well as requiring OEM parts for auto repair for certain vehicles. And correct me if I'm wrong, it's for vehicles that were purchased and have been owned for 36 months or less, at least in one bill, Senate Bill 1083. And it also required that the repair process be an OEM repair process, again, whatever that may mean. So I know there's a lot of testimony against that bill by the PNC trade groups, but it did pass the Senate last week. So it's in-house insurance, in the House Insurance Committee. So we'll see what happens with that as well. But a lot of concern about what that may end up costing, that you may have consumers having to pay more to have OEM parts installed when there may not be a need to do so. And there's one other bill. I think we were at this hearing, House Bill 1321 by Representative Clardy. This is, I think, attempt number 4 or 5 at this type of legislation, right, yeah. Somewhere in there. So again, this deals with requiring the vehicle to be repaired using OEM processes and prohibiting repairs using the least expensive part. And I don't think it makes any qualification whether that least expensive part is the best part or the appropriate part for the vehicle. You just can't use it if it's the least expensive. So it's an interesting bill. I think it was described in hearing as by the bill's author as not changing anything, but it seems to change quite a bit. There's some other provisions regarding the you can't
Crash
use a part.
testing also, yeah, unless it's
Yeah,
been tested correctly or exactly the same as the OEM part.
right. So it has some language in it that seems to change quite a bit. For the description, it changes nothing. But again, a lot of testimony against that by the PNC trades. It was left pending over at House Insurance a couple of weeks ago. So we'll keep an eye on that one as well. But two pretty big bills moving through that could have some cost implications. And we know there are companies that offer OEM part replacement as either endorsements, or some, as we understand it, actually offer OEM parts as the coverage they provide for any vehicle. But this would seem to take away that choice by companies and by consumers. So a lot of concern about what this does in a market, and I can attest to this personally, within the market where auto rates are already going up across the board. So yet another potential pressure on auto insurance rates for consumers.
Yeah,
What
it'll be
else?
interesting to watch. Auto, and I guess related to auto and home, another thing that has really been a big issue this session, and it started a little bit during the interim, and we predicted, because I know there was a recommendation by TDI on appraisal for the legislature to look at it or make a comment about it. And here, the last, I guess, several weeks, all the appraisal bills are starting to be heard, and there seems to be maybe movement on more than one, perhaps.
Yeah, it looks like there's multiple ones moving, and it's just an editorial comment. Interesting watching this evolve. You're right. It started during the interim. It started being a big issue because one company, following what had already been permitted in Texas, uh, filed with the department policy form that would limit appraisal to total loss situations only. And that ballooned into a larger discussion. And at the hearings, can we politely say, some mischaracterization of how appraisal works, and basically a notion that every company would no longer allow appraisal. We hadn't seen that happen in the marketplace. So there's a big push. You're right. There's multiple bills out there that do a lot of different approaches to it. House Bill 4194, some industry trade reps have been working with the bill sponsor, Representative Perez, and with some of the appraisal groups, the repair groups. And so some effort there to try to come up with something that makes sense. That
would be for both auto and home, correct?
Correct.
Personal, auto, and home. Yeah.
That's right, because that bill started out, I think, referencing all PNC policies, which could include commercial, but that bill's been limited down to auto and home, at least the last substitute version of it. So that one, by statute, creates some deadlines within the appraisal process, requires that either party can make a written demand for appraisal for the umpires. There's some time frames for that. And then I think of interest, the expenses are divided equally, and each party must pay their own appraiser. So that's the latest version of it as we do this podcast. It would apply to policies delivered, renewed, et cetera, on or after January 1 of next year. So it made it out of House Insurance. It's on the local and consent, or at least recommended for the local and consent calendar. But I still think there's some work going on that bill. So we'll see what happens with that one. Now, if you contrast that one to House Bill 597, you mentioned there may be two bills out there out of House Insurance. That's the bill that, at least the last version I saw of it, requires all PNC policies. So it could apply to commercial policies to have an appraisal procedure. And that one sets some very specific deadlines for the processing and notifications. But
I think most importantly to the loser pay provision, essentially, right?
That's exactly right. And the loser pays if the ultimate amount determined is $1 more than what the insurer proposed. So pretty interesting and significant loser pay approach. I know there's been some work to try to get that language changed. It was actually up for a vote in House Insurance to come out. And it failed to get out back on April 18th. So we'll see if it comes back up again or what happens with that bill. But and then over in the Senate, there was another, I'm sorry, there's one bill, but has a Senate and House version, Senate Bill 554, that also has appraisal, but that one's just limited to auto policies. And so
that one also has the dollar. Yeah.
Yeah, that also had loser pay thing. So the Senate version was heard and left pending in the Senate Business and Commerce Committee, and as was the House version heard and left pending in House Insurance. So we'll see where appraisal's going. It looks like it has momentum for something to pass, and I know the industry groups are talking and trying to come up with some language that is more acceptable there. But again, that may change insurance policies in Texas and the appraisal as a dispute resolution process.
Yeah, and I think that one's interesting too, just for people that are little political junkies, or like listening to the politics at play. There's so many players that are different sponsors and everything, that it'll be interesting to see if a House bill goes over and the Senate bill is different, who picks it up, what that morphs into, or what we end up with, because there seems to be a lot of players interested in a bill.
Yeah, a lot. So expect something to happen. And then our subject, usually we lead with this, but this session, everything else has kind of taken over. But usually we're talking a lot of Texas Windstorm Insurance Association, TWIA. And it really picked up in the last couple of weeks. It had been quiet for most of the session. Short version, there's two bills out there that now have funding structures for TWIA that are, if not identical, near identical. And basically those two set up some program where TWIA can enter finance agreements or get loans from the state, from a fund, the enterprise fund. And then that can be up to $1 billion. Basically, it's whatever TWIA would need to get up to their funding limit of $1 billion. And both would do away with the public securities or debt funding for the payment of TWIA losses, which is a good thing. But it also provides for a repayment of that state loan or financing arrangement that would be repaid via a statewide surcharge on property policy. So those two bills are aligned in that way, House Bill 1588 and the other one, Senate Bill 1217. But we won't go into the machinations of how we got to 1217. Let's just say it changed quite a bit from its first version. And so I think it's something the industry is talking to Senator Middleton's office about, to try to see which bill is going to go forward. So it's been an interesting twist on how TWIA may happen. We've seen alliances and hearings that we never thought we'd see. We've seen compliments and professions of I'll use the word mildly here, professions of love and friendship amongst groups that typically don't disagree, as they try to work out this funding mechanism. So TWIA may happen, it may not. We'll just see what happens, but it at least has some momentum. And you seem to have similar versions working in both the House and Senate.
Yeah, I think so. I think when you start looking at how Senate Bill 1217 morphed, maybe one of the big changes, or one of the big things that's still there that stands out, is that excluding the LAE from consideration for the PML. That seems to be a big point. That's very different, but
right. Yeah, good point. Good point. And let me add, the House Bill 1588 was voted out of House Insurance, so it has been recommended for local and consent calendar over the House. We referenced that earlier. How that works.
Stay on there. We don't know.
We don't know, but it's there now. And then the Senate bill was heard and left pending. So we'll see where that goes. But again, not a lot of time left. And speaking of TWIA, very quickly, last week the TWIA board met, and this is related to funding for this year. for TWIA's reinsurance program. They met and determined not to buy excess reinsurance above their 1 in 100 PML level. That's significant because under the law as it exists now, insurers have to pay for that excess reinsurance amount. And they were trying to purchase, we keep calling it $700 million in excess reinsurance. I think the actual number was $692 million. But just because of the pricing and the products available to buy that level, that layer of reinsurance, the board decided not to pursue it. So there will not be, at least as of right now, there does not appear to be an assessment for insurance companies this year to help pay for that excess reinsurance. So we'll see what happens with TWIA, but it is not front and center as our big issue this session.
Nope.
What else, Angie?
Do we want to touch a little bit on workers' comp? I know it's been a pretty quiet session, but there are bills that have been moving that might be of interest to our members.
Yeah, comp world is quiet, which is a good thing for the most part. And I think coming into session, we didn't think there'd be a lot of activity. I think we're tracking, correct me if I'm wrong, 60 bills or so.
Directly related to comp, yeah.
Yeah, that relate to comp. So one of those bills changes the lifetime income benefit levels or requirements, and that is House Bill 2468.
That's been something that's been tried for many sessions. Is that correct?
It is now at least 4 sessions, as I recall. And it relates to the definition of a traumatic head injury, which generally has been defined as, or in part defined as, something that results in incurable insanity or imbecility, which may have been fine when that term was created in 1930s, not so good today. And so there's been some attempt to better define that. There's some language, I don't have it in front of me, that would replace incurable insanity or imbecility in the statute. And so we'll see if it gets through this time. It also makes some changes for LIBs or lifetime income benefit qualifications for first responders, and kind of broadens that for that group of workers. Another key point of that bill is that it puts in statute the possibility of suspending the payment of LIBs benefits if the worker fails to attend a designated doctor exam. So that would be in statute if this passes. So that has actually passed the House, if I recall, and has referred over to the Senate Business and Commerce Committee. So we'll see what ends up happening with that bill. And then one other bill, House Bill 102 by Representative Thompson, Symphonia Thompson, allows the estate of a deceased employee to recover exemplary damages under the Act. Right now it's limited to parents. So there's some background on an actual incident, unfortunate death of a worker, and the estate could not recover. Well, this law would change that. And there's also a House joint resolution to do the same thing and put it to a vote to change the Texas Constitution.
And that one just got out of committee on Friday, maybe.
Okay. So this has a lot of momentum. I know there's some questions from the workers' comp community about the expansion of beneficiaries under the law, but that does bear watching because it seems to be moving forward pretty quickly. There's another bill whose number I've forgotten, don't have in front of me, but I will mention it, that's gotten some attention, that would allow a victim of sexual assault in the workplace to sue outside of the Comp Act for damages. And so that would take away the exclusive remedy under workers' comp if that does happen. That was heard, but I don't know what's going to, obviously nobody knows, but we don't know what's going to happen with that bill, and we'll keep an eye on it as well.
3977, and it was heard. It was voted out of Business and Industry, but again, we don't know with the deadlines coming up and everything. But yeah, it was voted out last week. So.
Okay. So a lot moving. I think the deadlines that Angie's put together something we'll be sharing with membership to better list out the deadlines that are coming up. But first big deadline is May 8th. Well, maybe 2 weeks away. We have the first deadline that House bills need to be reported out of committee. And honestly, in terms of working times, if your bill is actually reported out on May 8th, it's probably already in trouble. So we're keeping an eye on that to see what happens with that. The legislature ends May 29th. And then between there, it's almost at some point, Angie, it's almost every other day there's a deadline. That second week in May. So we'll keep you updated on those. The deadlines really are, like I said, where you start to see bills drop off. I think our own reports we've talked about as we hit these deadlines, we'll probably change our reports to really reflect the bills that are still, quote, alive. I always warn people, Angie, this having worked in the Senate, a bill is never dead. It may be a zombie.
You can find anything to be amended onto. Yes,
that's correct. It may be a bit of a zombie from time to time because a bill can be amended on to anything that is obviously of the same subject and same issue.
I think one of my proudest moments was when I worked in the Senate. I was trying to pass a bill for my boss, and I put a towing bill on an elevator bill, and it was great.
Well, they both get pulled in some way, so there's some relevance there. But yeah, so it is a perfect example. So I always warn people, don't celebrate when a deadline passes and the bill hasn't crossed whatever needs to happen by that deadline, because if somebody's trying to get it passed, it can be put onto another bill if the author and sponsor are willing to amend it when some other deadline hadn't passed. So keep an eye on it. We'll keep people updated. Like I said, I think the big issues for the industry by the end of this session will be what happens with ESG, what's going to happen with auto appraisal or even home appraisal requirements, and then what's going to happen with auto repair. I think those are probably the big three, and then TWIA funding right after that. But that's where we're going to focus our attention. There's obviously a lot of other bills out there. I still think we're tracking the 500, but when we really look, we're probably down to a couple hundred that are still alive or out of committee, I should say, and moving. So we'll keep you updated. But this is kind of the fun time, Angie. This is, when you were over at the Capitol or when I was over there working for clients, it was, this is when you're running around from office to office, trying to keep things going or talking to the calendar committee, or even, as I say, you sit and watch an office sometimes to see who's going in and out. Figure out
a lot of people watching who's trying to kill your bill or
yeah. So and the sneak attacks, because that does happen also in bills. This the other thing about end of session is somebody who hasn't spoken up the entire session on a bill will show up at a hearing. There's a possibility and try to kill a bill, and it happened recently in an insurance issue where somebody who hadn't spoken got up and talked about a bill, and first time we heard about that concern. So I think we just need to keep everybody keep their eyes open. We'll keep you updated. Angie will keep our reports coming out weekly, and get ready. It's a fast ride the last quarter of the session. So anything else you want to add to that, Angie?
No, just we'll keep everybody updated, and as you said, we'll be watching out to make sure that things that we're watching don't get stuck on other bills, and if they do, we'll let everybody know about it, and anything can happen.
Okay, well, I will say something for those of you who don't watch the show. I'm sorry, but if you watch the show Succession, we at some point are going to sit down and try to think about this session in terms of the show Succession, and sort of the political machinations that go on in that show and how they may apply to the legislature. So we may have a little fun podcast after everything's done to discuss that. But thanks, Angie, for your great work on the session. And I know you're putting out a report today or soon, kind of highlighting, here's the last big set of bills we're looking at.
Yes, we should get that to members this afternoon.
Okay.
Yep,
Well,
as
that's
great.
of
right. Yeah.
recording
So
Monday. Yeah, there we go.
yeah. So
Probably.
yeah, if there's any questions that anybody has, if you log into we'll get it out to members today, but if you are a ICT member, it'll be available also in the member info hub, as well as your inbox. So Albert, Angie, thank you so much for another review of what's going on in the session. A lot of moving parts here with only 35 days left. It is getting exciting with not only impacts on the insurance industry, but impacts on consumers in the insurance industry. So it'll be interesting to see how everything plays out in the end. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me remind everybody, we do have, not only do we have podcasts, we also have webinars that are available to ICT members. You can go check out our website with the upcoming schedule of webinars. In May, we have a great presentation set from Milliman, and we'll be talking about the future of catastrophe modeling and how that affects the insurance industry, but also, especially along the Texas coast with flooding and hurricanes, and how we're what are the new trends and technology in coming up with catastrophe modeling in the future. And also we have our insurance PNC symposium that is in July 12th through the 14th. We are going to have that up in Dallas. We have some awesome speakers and panelists ready to go for that. And so again, go to insurancecouncil.org for registration information on that. And that will do it for today's version of ICT on PNC. Thank you for joining us. This has been a production of the Insurance Council of Texas, Austin, Texas. All rights reserved. Copyright 2023.